Education opens doors for the gospel, bringing hope to dark places and sparking lasting change around the world. At Teach Beyond, we're reaching the nations through education.
This is Transformed and Transformational, a podcast from Teach Beyond. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're exploring how the gospel transforms us and overflows to impact classrooms, communities, and the world.
Let's jump into today's conversation. Today we're talking with Katie Davis Majors, who is a well-known author and the founder of Amazima Ministries.
You know, Kian, I distinctly remember one of my students reading Katie's first book, Kisses from Katie, probably during our silent reading time, or she was telling me about it after class or something. And she was so inspired by Katie's story. It's amazing just to think about how many people were just like that student who've read Katie's books and then been encouraged to follow Jesus in new ways as a result of that.
Yes, there's something so powerful about hearing other people's stories and the impact that they can have.
Katie's going to share some of her story with us, but I love that it's not just, let's go back and tell the story of the past of when she moved to Uganda right after high school, but it's also a story of continuing to walk by faith.
Amazima Ministries is an organization that cares for vulnerable children and families in Uganda and is an example of how education can open doors for the gospel.
Let's go over to the conversation with Katie now.
Hi, Katie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Well, Katie, we're so excited to talk with you today. And your family isn't maybe what we would say is a traditional family. I'm doing air quotes here. So can you talk to us about who is under your roof today and maybe how life today is different from, say, 10 or 12 years ago?
Sure. Yeah. So my husband and I actually met and got married in Uganda, and we have adopted children and biological children. Right now, today, only our four youngest children live with
Mhm.
us, which I feel like is a surprise to anybody who knows my story. It's a surprise to me. That still feels really small. Then we have two who are at college who kind of go back and forth. So sometimes they're home. Now, being the
Uh-huh.
school year, they're not home. But in total, we have 15 kids. We have 13 children that we adopted from Uganda, and then we have two biological children. And most of them are grown and kind of out and about in the
Mhm.
Nashville area, which is where our family lives now.
Mhm. Mhm.
I feel like with what you've just told us, I'm sure you experience this. People have lots and lots of more questions. So I'm curious, Katie, if you can go back and tell us a little bit more about your story and the story of moving to Uganda right after high school. I'm guessing there were some people who voiced some concerns about your big move, as well as others who have maybe had their doubts that it would actually happen.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so, like you mentioned, when I was 18, I actually went on my first short term mission trip to Uganda. I went with my mom, and we were in Uganda for about 3 weeks serving at an orphanage. And while I was there, I met a Ugandan pastor and his wife who ran a different orphanage that was quite a bit more rural, kind of in a village in a much more impoverished setting. And he said to me, I really believe that the Lord is going to bring you back here, and when he
Mm.
does, I just want you to know that my wife and I have talked about it. We would love to host you. You could come and live with us. You could come and serve with us. And at the time, going back to Uganda wasn't something that was really on my radar. I had planned,
Mhm.
to graduate high school and go to college and be on this very traditional track that everybody around me was on and that my parents had been on before me. And so, but I came back to the United States after that 3 week trip, and I could not get those words out of my
Mhm.
mind. And I was dreaming about Uganda and I was thinking about Uganda. And so I actually graduated high school with plans to, I had gotten accepted into college and I deferred for a year. And I said, I'm going to take a gap year and go and work with this pastor and his wife and serve with them at their orphanage. I was going to help them. I was going to help teach in a little preschool that they were trying to get started on the compound of their orphanage. And so for the gap year, my parents were pretty supportive. I mean, they had kind of taught me to love travel and taught me to love
Mhm.
other cultures, and also really raised me with love for serving others and seeing the importance of that. I do think that there were a lot of people just in kind of my home community that thought like, whoa, Africa, that's crazy. It feels so far away if you have no connection, and it feels so different. And
Mhm.
maybe if you don't have a ton of education on what different parts of Africa are like, it can feel almost like a movie scene.
Mhm.
We just have these different ideas. But I moved to Uganda, having committed to be there for a year, and I lived in an orphanage with 120 children between the ages of 2 and 16. And so lots of kids, not a lot of staff, not a lot of
Mm,
space, not a lot of resources.
mhm,
But I fell in love with these children. Some of them weren't even that much younger than me. And as I got to know them, and as was asking them questions about their lives, a lot of them would tell me stories about their families. They would talk about
mm,
their parents, they would talk about their grandparents, and then they would talk about how some of these people lived right around the corner in the very same community where we were living. So, probably within the first 6 months of my year in Uganda, I was learning a really hard lesson. Coming from the United States and just not having a great idea of Ugandan culture or the landscape. I had just assumed that if you lived in an orphanage, that either meant like your parents didn't want you or
mhm,
something tragic had happened to them. Maybe you had lost your parents.
mhm,
And this is a super old statistic because this was like 20 years ago now. But at that time, the statistic was that 85% of children living in institutional care had at least one living parent. And so
mhm,
it's true in Uganda, and it's actually true in most of East Africa anyway, that a lot of children who are living in an orphanage are actually not orphans. They have a living parent, or maybe if they don't have living parents, they have living grandparents or aunts or uncles. Ugandan culture is very communal. People love to take care of each other more than I had ever been exposed to in the United States. And so people aren't parents aren't sending their children to live in an orphanage because they don't want to raise them, but because of poverty. And so
mhm,
that stinks. And that, even at
yeah,
18 years old, I was able to say, like, man, that poverty should not be a thing that
mm,
separates families. And one of the
mhm,
big hurdles in Uganda is that school is not free. And even the government schools that are inexpensive are pretty unaffordable for somebody who lives in a rural community who maybe is farming as a way of life. They don't have cash to pay for school fees. And because many families are large, maybe they can send one child to school, or maybe they can send a child to school for a semester, but then they run out of
mm,
money. So a lot of families were sending their children to live in orphanages just so that they would have access to an American sponsor so that their education could be funded. And I was just sad about that. And like, even
mhm,
like, it's funny to me to think of my 18-year-old self feeling so strongly that, like,
mhm,
no, this is not okay. And so I shared some stories around that with my parents. And there were little girls and a grandmother that I had gotten to know through our church that lived in that local community. And the girls were about to turn 6. They needed to start kindergarten, and the grandmother was thinking about, should I send them to live here at the orphanage so that they can go to school? And so I was at the family's house for lunch, and I just asked the grandmother, how about if I could figure out a way to commit to pay for their schooling? Like,
mm,
I could, if I could figure it out, if I could commit to pay for them to go all the way through school, would you want to keep the girls at home? And, she started crying. She said, absolutely. I want to raise my granddaughters. I promised my daughter that I would raise my granddaughters, but I don't want them to be stuck in this cycle of poverty. I want them to be educated so that they have a better future. And the reality was that to pay for them to go to school was going to cost like the equivalent of $100. I mean, it wasn't even, it was what my
mm,
family would spend to go out to eat. And so
mhm,
I called my parents and was like, hey, this is what we're going to do. We need
mhm.
$100 and we're going to change these people's lives. Um,
Mm,
and so as I did that, I did pay for those little girls to go to school, and my parents shared that story with a lot of friends and family here in the United States. I was also keeping a blog at the time when we were all blogging, and um, people started reading it. People started wanting to help. People started saying, like, oh, that's a need that I could get behind, and that's an amount of money that I could probably contribute. Like, I could not order takeout this week and send a child to school instead. And so within the first year that I was living in Uganda, I was paying for 40 children in my local community to go to the local school so that they would be able to stay with their families. And I was, collecting this money from friends and family of mine, back in the United States. And so also by the time that I was about a year in, I knew, oh, this is not this is not going to be just a gap year. This is like clearly this is something I'm super passionate about. I definitely felt like it was going to become my life's work. I also really felt like God
Mm,
was blessing it and he was opening doors and this is where he wanted me to be. So at that
mm.
point, I did receive some more pushback from,
Yeah, yeah.
well-intended friends and family in the United States because at face value, it does. It kind of looks like, well, you're throwing your life away, or it could
Yeah,
look like
yeah.
that. And my parents had made such careful plans for me and
Mm,
had me on a track to be very successful. And I, as a parent now, I look back and go like, yeah, I would have totally panicked if one of my if one of
mm,
my teenagers was like, I'm moving to a different continent and
right.
don't know when I'll be back. Um, but I will say I do think also my parents they love the Lord and they definitely, I think, kind of came to the place of realizing, okay, we think that this is where God has her and like
Mhm,
above safety. Yeah, it's a real
mhm,
place of surrender as a parent to go like,
mhm,
okay, I want you to follow God no matter what he has for you, even if at face value, it doesn't look like the safest path or the easiest path or the path that leads to the most
mhm,
success or comfort or whatever.
mhm, mhm,
As you kind of talk through those different steps, moving to a remote location, being in a place where you don't necessarily know the language, taking on those kids to send them through school, kind of all of these little steps. And then now, as you are able to share your story with bigger audiences, with more people, and kind of know where you're at right now, are you surprised by where those steps took you? Like, kind of where each progressive small step might have ended you up at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been so many years now, and I'm still always just like so blown away. And I think it's such a cool, even to me, like, even though it is my own story, even to me, it is such a reminder of what God can do with small steps of obedience and just saying yes to the next thing that He places in front of us. Because truly, I mean, that is my story is that I committed to go teach preschool for a year thinking, a year and then I'll get it out of my system. And then I said yes to these two little girls. I said, okay, I will help your grandmother send you to school. And then that turned into 40 children in our community going to school. And then that turned into, over the course of the next 4 years, that turned into 600 children in our community going to school. And then, so I founded an organization. Once we had about 40, we decided, okay, let's make this an official thing.
Yeah.
So I founded an organization called Amazima. Amazima is the Luganda word for truth. And that was just born out of, as I really prayed and as I got to know these families, I really truly believed that meeting people's basic needs is good and it is right. And
Mm,
it is what Jesus calls us to do to make sure that our neighbors have access to food and medical care and education and the things that they need is really important. But also, we don't want to give people those things without giving them the hope and the truth of the gospel. And so felt like
mm,
God impressed it on my heart really early on that the gospel
mhm,
was to be central in this
mm,
ministry. And so I chose amazima, that word for truth, from you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free when Jesus says
mm,
that in Mark. And so um yeah, over the years, Amazima has grown and grown. We have 300 staff members now in Uganda. We have thousands of families that we're in relationship with through different outreaches. We have two school campuses, and discipleship really kind of undergirds everything that we do. We want every person that Amazima serves to be in a deep and authentic relationship with someone on our staff, someone who
mm,
is walking closely with them to make sure that they know and understand the love of Jesus. But
mhm.
all of it was just like such one baby step
Yeah,
at a
yeah,
time that it is crazy to me to even say all that out loud and look back
right.
at all that God has done and the way that He just can use just our, one step at a time
Yeah,
in faith and
yeah,
trusting Him.
yeah. Katie, I resonate so strongly with that. And I think it's important for us to hear like writing books, founding an organization, even, the saying yes to financial coordinating that financial support for covering school costs, like, all of that happened progressively, not at one time and not, like, knowing that was the goal, right? It wasn't like you set out to have a story worth writing a book about, but because of taking those next steps and I think you wrote it as the result of following Jesus into the impossible because he leads
Mhm.
us to places we that almost seem impossible to us until it's actually part of our story.
Right.
So I'm thinking about, those moments where you had a decision of like, is this mine to do? Or am
Mhm.
I supposed to go back and go to university, like kind of like I was expecting, like my family was expecting? How do you discern in those moments, okay, this is something actually that I'm supposed to do something about, not just tell others about, or not just, leave behind and go back to another thing?
Oh, that is such a good question, and part of me is, just grateful that I was young and kind of naive. Like, there's definitely a way in which, like, I did not totally know what I was stepping
Mm.
into, and I
Mhm.
think as an almost 40-year-old now, I maybe wouldn't say yes in the same way
Mhm.
because now I've lived more life. I've lived enough to know that things are scary and things don't go as planned. And so now I would have this whole list of reasons
Yeah.
not to do that or not to step in. And so for me personally, I don't know how much of it was discernment and how much of it was just like, Jesus says to have faith like a child. And I
Mm.
think as children, we are bolder and we are less
Mm.
afraid and we
Yeah.
are more trusting. And I really did kind of just like see a need in front of me and think like,
Mhm.
I could do something about that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was struck. I mean, I had encountered poverty in the Nashville area where I grew up, but not in the way that I did in Uganda. And I just really think at a very young age was wrestling with like, wait, how come I was born into this and then these people were born into this and there's no rhyme or reason. There's nothing that I did to deserve, that I grew up having access to what I need and they didn't. So kind of like some big like
Yeah.
life changing, worldview shaping kind of questions that were coming to the surface for me like
Sure.
in my late teens and early 20s that made me just want to keep stepping in. Um yeah, as far as discernment, I mean, I think there is a lot of prayer that needs to be involved as we're trying to
Mhm.
figure out, okay, Lord, is this, is like you're saying, is this something that you're calling me to step into? Or is this something that you're
Mhm.
just calling me to be aware of so that I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
share about it with other people? Um, Lots of prayer, lots of, having wise counsel in your life. And then I
Yeah.
do think just like one step at a time. And I mean, I remember
Yeah.
sometimes praying like, "God, close the door."
Yeah. Right.
Like, "I'm gonna step until you don't let me step anymore, and, like, please make it not be that far."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We last week's episode was about like the myth of calling, and I think there's an
Mm,
element of that, Katie, where
yes.
we're like, I'm waiting for some sort of sign, but there's the flip of that. If we're taking those steps and the opportunity is still there and we just keep stepping forward, then that is walking with discernment and faith because you already had the community of people in your life who were speaking in your life. You already had a prayer life. And so it wasn't like forming those now to make this decision. Those were the foundation for stepping forward, just taking those next steps.
Right, and I mean, we have God's word, right? I mean, I feel like I
Hmm.
hear so
Yeah.
many young people say like, "Oh, I just don't hear him speaking to me." And I think, well, we have his words right here that we can look into, and if we're stepping into things that are not in contradiction to his word, then we can keep stepping
Hmm.
confidently, right? And so
Hmm.
for me, I mean, that was the story of me in Uganda, but it's how I try to live here in Nashville too, is like
Sure.
God does ask me to love my neighbor, right? He does ask me to care about those who are hungry and those who are lacking. And he asks me to love my enemy, which is sometimes hard, and to be slow to anger and to be patient and all
Hmm.
these things. And so, like, I can step confidently into
Hmm.
those things, even without knowing specifics, because Jesus
Hmm.
has already given me the instruction to do so. And I think,
Right.
yeah, I won't derail us, but I love that you were talking about the myth of calling, because that's a question I get all the time, is how did you know that
Mhm.
God was calling you to Uganda? And I think, like you mentioned earlier, Heather, people think that I set out to do X, Y, and Z with my life, right? To have
Mhm.
this life that was this great story that was worthy of writing a book about. I had no idea. And I don't even think I would have said, I look back now and go like, "Oh, got it. Clearly God was calling me or moving me," or however you wanna talk about it, to Uganda. But I don't
Right.
think at the time I would have said that. I was
Yeah.
just trying to be obedient
Yeah.
to the doors that God was opening in front of me, and to love my neighbor as I
Mhm.
want to be loved myself, and to do that in the community I was in
Mhm.
Uganda. And that just kind of grew and grew and grew into a story that I never could have written. And I think that's just as possible for anybody who is kind of wondering, what does God have me to do, or what might he be calling me to? Like, there are people who need the gospel, who need the love of Jesus right outside all of our front doors. And as we kind of slowly step into meeting other people's needs and sharing the love of Jesus with others, I really believe that God is going to refine that and narrow that to, as we just keep taking steps. He writes these stories that we never could have come up with on our own.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned kind of you saw something and you're like, this isn't right. And I think there are so many ways people can overthink it. And like somebody, if you ask somebody that, they give you a long explanation about maybe why that should be the case. But you saw it and you're like, this isn't right. I'm going to do something about it. And kind of, you said, I don't know, you were young. So like, not necessarily overthinking it, but it's great that you can just move and like see what the Bible's saying and act on that without saying like, well, I don't know, making it like an academic practice of why things are the way they are, but actually just acting and going to where you're called. And I think a lot of people can feel that way when it comes to things like poverty or lack of education, because you can overthink and be like, doing one thing is just a drop in the bucket. It's just a global, huge issue. So what can we do about it? And so I'm curious, kind of what encouragement or practical suggestions you have for someone who's trying to discern how they can make a difference in something that does seem so large.
Yeah, that's great, because absolutely we can just be so paralyzed, right? Like, the needs are so vast. And even in my own life, like, Amazima is helping almost 1,000 children receive an education, but 1,000 is small. Like, the population of Uganda is 60 million, right? So, you if you start to do that, you'll never move. You'll be paralyzed always. But I think what I can say now that I didn't know so many years ago is that it wasn't really it wasn't really just about me helping others or loving my neighbor or serving in some capacity. It was about the story that God was writing in in me, and the way that he was changing and shaping and forming me, and he was growing my dependence on him and my relationship with him as I kept stepping into these impossible things and seeing him be faithful. Like, it's amazing that so many children on the other side of the world have access to education because of that obedience. But there's another story at play, and it's that, like, God changed me, and he formed my life, and, like, in his grace and his kindness, he allowed me to be a part of something bigger than myself that changed the way I view him and the way I view the world. And so I think, yeah, we're not gonna do it. We're not gonna end world hunger. We're not gonna make sure that every kid in the world has access to safety or education or a loving family. We're not gonna end poverty, but we obey Jesus by stepping into the things that he puts in front of us, and in the process, we are made more into his image. And that's what he means when Jesus prays, you know, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The only way for us to experience that is to step into the next thing that he asks of us. And we can do that, we do that one person at a time. I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast before, but there's a man, his name is Mr. Sam, and he sits at the exit where I get off for church every Sunday. And he was unhoused. He has housing now, yay. But he just struggles. He's a veteran. He struggles to make ends meet. And on Sunday morning, I make him a cup of coffee. And it's just now for 4 years, I've been handing this guy a cup of coffee out my window, and we chat, and he knows all about my life and my kids, and I know about his wife and his grandkids and his little dog, and I mean, it's not I wish that I could end the problem of people in Nashville that don't have housing. I can't do that, but making him his cup of coffee is now like an important part of my Sunday morning routine, and it's an important part of my kids' Sunday morning routine, and so, like, it's not really about the cup of coffee, it's about the way that God forms us when we step into what he's asked of us, and so that would be my encouragement for anyone who's just feeling so paralyzed by, like, "But the problems are so big," and it really is just a drop in the bucket, and, like, that's true. It really is just a drop in the bucket, and that that can't keep us from kindness and obedience to Jesus.
Let's take a short break for a story from the field from Hannah, who serves with Teach Beyond in another part of Uganda.
Hi, my name is Hannah Thomas, and I serve in Uganda as a teacher trainer with the Sparrow Project. I have been really blessed with the opportunity to work with the local team here and go out and train teachers, and it's just been amazing to see the value of community and the teachers' desire to be able to learn about what it means to have a Christ-centered classroom. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity to get to live in Uganda and work alongside brothers and sisters in Christ that are serving here in Uganda. One of the things that I have really learned as an American moving to Uganda is the value of relationship building and also just slowing down. Here, there's a big focus on relationships, and I've really enjoyed getting to work on adapting to the culture here in that way. And so, yeah, over the last year, I've just enjoyed being able to serve the local community in under-resourced schools as we are providing training to the teachers and seeing them really grow and implement what they've been learning as well. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to work with Teach Beyond and to be able to serve teachers here in Uganda.
For our weekly spotlight, we are focusing on elementary school or primary school opportunities. If you want to learn more about opportunities to serve, visit the Teach Beyond Opportunity Board at teachbeyond.org/go.
And now back to our conversation with Katie.
I love your story about the cup of coffee because I'm curious. So there's the part of it being a drop in the bucket, and there's this big ocean of things. But then on like a practical kind of personal level, what does that interaction, that relationship look like in Uganda with those kids? Like, what does that look like? And what do you hope people know about it? Because they don't see it as like a huge thing that's like a huge boulder to move, but like on a personal, one-to-one, day-to-day situation, what does that look like? Um, to kind of interact and serve in that way.
Yeah, well, it's when I first founded Amazima and we had about 40 children, it was really my heart to make sure that they were being mentored and discipled. And so I had made a couple friends in the community that I hired to help me be kind of mentors to these students. I grew up when I was in high school. A woman from my church took an interest in me and really poured into me. And though I had grown up in a believing home and I had always gone to church, this woman, her name's Jenny, and she talked about Jesus like he was her very best friend. And she read the Bible like her life depended on it. And I saw that and I wanted what she had. And that was so formative to my faith. And so that's what I really wanted, even in the early days of Amazima for our students. I wanted them to have someone to connect with and someone to look up to and someone who would walk alongside them and say, here's the gospel, not just in words, but this is how we live the gospel alongside of each other. And so Amazima's entire program is built on mentoring and discipleship and those like strong relationships. And so obviously, I could only have relationships with that first handful of students that are really personal. And they are all, I mean, a bunch of them just graduated high school last year. A bunch of them, I'm actually going to be in Uganda at the end of the year because a bunch of them are gonna graduate from high school this year, and those are, like, kids that I have watched grow up from the time they were 5, 6, 7 years old, and so,
That's when you feel really old, right, Katie?
oh my goodness.
Like, how is this
Yes.
possible?
Yes. And they freeze in time in your head,
Yes.
especially now that I'm only seeing them a couple times a year, right? So they're, like, frozen in my head as kindergartners and first graders, and now they're walking across a stage in their caps and gowns, but, yeah, it's amazing to think of the ripple of, okay, I maybe have strong and deep relationship with 25 of the kids in our program that I have known and walked with through many different seasons of life, and but each of those 25 kids is going to go out into the world, and maybe one day they will have 5 or 10 or 20 people that they are in relationship with, that they are walking out a gospel lifestyle with, and just like the ripples of how just living authentically and living your life for Jesus in front of other people, it causes such a ripple effect.
Yeah. It's humbling to be in that position, right? Where to realize like, oh, one little drop in the bucket does have a ripple effect. And so we can keep walking with Jesus faithfully, not knowing what not trying to control what those ripple effects are going to be even, and not knowing what they are.
Right. Well, I think of even the woman who discipled me. I mean, like
Yeah.
she discipled all other like a bunch of other high school girls. I have no
Yeah.
idea what any of them are doing, but just like
Mm,
the way, like I'm sure there's a whole network of us out there that were
yeah.
just
Yeah.
sitting on Miss Jenny's couch eating chocolate chip cookies and reading the Bible together.
That's right. That's right. What a good encouragement for that kind of faithfulness too. You've alluded to living in Nashville now, having lived in Uganda before, and still kind of living between these worlds now, Katie. And lots of people who have lived in more than one place may resonate with that tension of calling multiple places home and feeling like they're more at home in one than others at different times. So what does it look like for you to navigate these different homes, especially when they are at pretty different extremes? Like what life is like is pretty different. So talk to us about that.
So it's about 4 years ago, our family transitioned to the United States. And it was it was a hard transition at first. The culture is super different. America is just moving at this super fast pace that most countries don't move at. I don't think it's Uganda specific. I think most countries and cultures are not quite as much in a hurry as America often is. And so it was pretty jarring, but I'm really grateful. I feel like a lot of what our family kind of learned to embody in Uganda, as far as living communally and inviting people into our space. Uganda is a super hospitable culture, super welcoming, super warm, super interruptible. There are certain like rules of social engagement in Uganda whereby you really cannot be in a hurry, because even just to greet someone properly, you have to do this whole like back and forth exchange of like, how are you doing? And how's your mom? And you go through everybody in the family, and how was your night? And like, depending on what time of day it is, there are all these different ways to like
Huh.
properly greet a person. Um, and so it's just trying, I think it's been interesting for our family to try to bring some of those things into our life here and kind of live at a slower pace and live a more interruptible lifestyle, even while living in the United States. And we do get to go back and forth quite a bit. And so I'm super thankful for that. I think that has made the transition a little bit easier, that there hasn't really been any like finality to it, I don't think. But yeah, it's always encouraging to get back there and just kind of be reminded of like, oh yeah, I like living like this, and
Hmm.
I can bring those lessons here to a different culture
Yeah.
and context.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Well, you've talked about the impact of education on that community and also the importance of the gospel being central to the work of Amazima. And so I want to maybe go back to that thought and explore that a little bit further. You wrote this quote, and I wrote this down because it really stood out to me. Obviously, the key to eternal life for these children is Jesus, but the key to a better life here and now is education. Can you talk about how you see education as having such a key impact now, even as Jesus and the gospel are at the heart of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that um obviously, like, poverty is not something that God designed or created. It's a result of the fall. And so we don't want to see our neighbors here or in Uganda living in extreme poverty. And in a lot of cultures, especially in like sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of cultures, poverty is present because there is a lack of education. So people do not have the, a parent or a grandparent can't afford to send their children to school, so those children grow up without education. They can't afford to send their children to school. There aren't a lot of job possibilities. I mean, unemployment is super high in Uganda. And so, something we stress a lot at the high school and college level is entrepreneurship and just like thinking outside the box, critical thinking. How can we create jobs? How can we be somebody who, just really stands out. We talk a lot about soft skills with our students as far as like interview skills and looking people in the eyes and just different things that would set them apart so that they can be employable. But without education, a lot of times you are not employable. And so then if you're not employable, you're just kind of stuck in this cycle of poverty and you can't help your own children to come out of it. And so we see education as a big part of the answer to that. And that can be education at schools, which is one of the primary focuses of Amazima is for students to be educated at school. But we also do a lot of community education where we're teaching parents and guardians, and they might not be able to finish elementary school or high school or whatever, but we are teaching them literacy. We're teaching them numeracy. We're teaching them how to manage their money. We're teaching them job skills. We're teaching them different vocations that they can do to make some money. And so education can come in all different forms. It doesn't have to be just at school. And we see that because education takes up so much of a child's day and then eventually like so many years of their life, that is such a great way to disciple a child and share the gospel, because we have so many touch points with students having such a long day with them, and then we have touch points with their parents and their community members through that.
Hmm. You know, Katie, we in Teach Beyond talk about how education opens doors for the gospel, and that the idea that education is missions. It's a way to share the gospel. How have you seen that to be true?
Well, so much of education is just like doing life with people, right? Like you think of a teacher and a student, and the student is, they're learning facts and information from the teacher, but they're learning a lot more of that from a teacher or from being in a classroom environment. Like they are learning who they are and how to move in the world and how to interact with the world, and they're watching the teacher and they're maybe mimicking the teacher. And so when we have education as our vehicle for the gospel to go forth, and we specifically hire teachers who know and love Jesus and want to model Jesus in their interactions with the student, then the student is seeing a real time model of the gospel in front of them. And I think in different contexts in Uganda, our teachers can share the gospel as they teach, which is really special and beautiful. They can try to teach their lesson plans from a biblical worldview. But even in places where that's not true, even in places where a teacher might not be allowed to share their faith, they can still be a model of what it looks like to live like Jesus. And with a lot of children, especially children from impoverished communities, a teacher might be, I mean, probably the person that they see in their day that tells them you are valued, you are important, you are seen, you are loved, right? And those are gospel truths right there that a teacher can communicate both with their words and with their face and with their interactions with the student. And so for children coming from impoverished backgrounds, they might not be getting that anywhere else. And so education is such a great vehicle by which the gospel goes forth both in action and in deed. And it might be, I mean, for a lot of kids, it might be their only touch point with an adult who says, I see you, I love you, I value you. I teach Sunday school, which is, pretty small compared to what we're talking about. The teachers at Amazima have all day, every day with these kids. But even at Sunday school, right, there's one student in my class who doesn't like goldfish. So I give her Cheerios instead. And she now notices that I remember that she wants the goldfish instead of, or that she wants the Cheerios instead of the goldfish. And so just little things like that, that teachers have the opportunity to do to instill that message of you're loved, you're seen, you're valued in a child. I think it's so important.
I'm curious, as you look back now over your story, what have you learned about God and about yourself through your experience?
Big question, right?
Yeah,
What
sorry,
have you
softball to end.
learned? A lot of stuff, I hope.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's interesting because Uganda really, like, I entered Uganda right as I entered adulthood, right? And so while I didn't grow up there per se, I grew into an adult there. And so a lot of my kind of growing up happened in my early adult years in Uganda. I think I've learned just to stay really close to Jesus and really how dependent on him I am. I think he's really kind that anytime in my life, literally ever, that I think, "Oh, I got this. I'm doing okay. I can do this." Something happens and suddenly I'm like, "Oh no. No, I still really need to be dependent on God to achieve anything at all." And I think I've definitely learned, as we've talked about some, just that open-handedness and surrender to step into what God puts in front of you just one day at a time and one moment at a time really can lead to such a beautiful life. And that's hard. I mean, I still in my head try to make plans for like what I'm going to do or where we're going to be in a year from now. And I feel like over and over and over again, God just shows me that his plans really and truly are better. And I look back and I'm able to say like, yeah, I want what you want for me, God.
Mm, mm. What a great response to have. And I love that it's the kindness of God that reminds us of our dependence on him when sometimes in the moment it can feel like, wait, now things are chaotic again. No, it's the kindness of God to remind us that we are continually dependent on him. Thanks so much for that reminder.
Katie, thank you so much for joining us. We have one last question we ask everyone before we let them go at the end. And that is, what's one thing that's changing your life right now? So this can be something really big or something small. It doesn't have to be, it can be heavy or light, kind of you're free to take it where you want to go. I'll go first and then Heather will go and you'll get to go last. You have a little bit of time to think about it. And what's changing my life is I got a Cricut machine, one of those cutting machines that you can kind of print things and cut paper. And I got it a while ago and I finally actually did a project with it and it was really fun.
Oh,
So that's been changing my life recently.
what did you make?
Kind of confetti with it.
Oh, I love that
Just
answer.
lots of, yeah, lots of little shapes.
Amazing. That's
So yeah.
great. Well, what's changing my life is some late season dahlias. I've talked about my garden on this podcast probably too many times for everyone, but it's been really nice that my dahlias keep blooming so late in the year. I've gotten fall, like well into the fall, dahlia blooms, and I haven't had to dig out my plants yet because we haven't had a hard frost yet. So I'm just watching the weather. But until then, and really enjoying the late season dahlias. So we both went with a lighter answer here, Katie. What's been changing your life lately?
Mine is light as well. What has been changing my life is that we got a puppy in August, and
Oh, that's
he's
great.
very sweet, but he is very destructive. And in August, he was like this big, and he has grown so fast, and now he is giant. He's so much bigger than we thought he was gonna be. He's
Oh
so
my
much bigger
goodness.
than both his parents. Um,
Ooh.
so he is changing my life in that he is wild and rambunctious and, taking our shoes and chewing up our
Yes.
stuff, but it's a lot of fun.
What kind of puppy is it?
Yeah.
Is a half border collie, half poodle.
Oh, what a
Okay.
mix. Nice.
What's
So
his name?
his name is Oreo. He's black and white.
There you go.
Yes, he's very
Great
Fantastic.
name.
cute.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Katie, for joining us today and for sharing more of your story and for giving us just some good reminders about following Jesus and being obedient one step at a time.
Yeah, thank you.
It was great to hear more of Katie's story.
When she was talking about her younger self being more willing to say yes and just walk forward into the next opportunity, that childlike faith, it reminded me of what Chris Fletcher shared in a few episodes ago.
Yes, that's right. I remember Chris had commented that we asked what he would go back and tell his younger self, and he said he would actually want to have advice from his younger self to now his older self to kind of say, like,
Yes.
be bold, go out in faith, and surrender yourself to Jesus.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we don't say yes to Jesus just once, but that every day gives us opportunities to keep saying yes.
Heather and I serve with Teach Beyond, a mission organization reaching the nations through education. To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you subscribe or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.